Hello, everyone. Welcome to FEM 2020. We are discussing many topics focusing on women's health. And one of the important topics which we are discussing right now is menopause, how it impacts all of us medically, psychologically, and socially. Uh, to moderate this session, I'll invite Dr. Vaishali Deshmukh, who is an endocrinologist in Pune. So, Dr. Vaishali, kindly introduce other panelists.
Yeah, sure. So it's my pleasure and to conduct this session today on menopause. And I congratulate the FEM team and Dr. Beena for a wonderfully designed program. It's my honor also to be amongst eminent panelists today. And to begin with, we have Dr. Sridevi Paladugu. She's the consultant endocrinologist at Apollo Hospitals, Hyderabad. She's very passionate about women endocrinology, working with women from puberty till menopause, and she feels that endocrinologists have a lot of work to be done in primary prevention of many complicated endocrine disorders in future. So if they start working for prevention, they can do a lot of good. So she believes that she should go into the depth of the lifestyle of each and every endocrine patients, and I'm glad to have her here. We have a lot to learn from her also and her experiences. Next panelist, please. Yeah. Dr. Jyoti Undi Madam is a senior, renowned, and very respected obstetric and gynecologist colleague of ours in Pune. She has a special interest in menopausal medicine, and she is a grandma to a wonderful, I would say, granddaughter, I guess. Yeah.
Son.
Grandson, okay. And she feels that that's the best moment of her life, and that she has been able to spend the time with her grandchild. And second important thing is that she is one of the representatives of the Indian Menopausal Society, and she represents the Asia Pacific Menopause Federation. And her oratory skills are phenomenal. I've heard her speaking on n number of forums, and I think her skills are unmatched. She's a faculty in numerous international and national conferences. And Madam, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Then next panelist, please. Yeah. So we have Dr. Suparna Telang, Madam. She's been actually a good friend of mine since long in practice. It's a pleasure to talk to her. And known her as a senior psychiatrist and a consultant in sexual medicine, and she's working in Pune with us. And her activities in terms of spreading awareness about misconceptions about sexual health and she has treated many couples successfully in this aspect. She believes that menopause is more in the mind of a person rather than in the physique and in the physiology. And I think we have so many things to learn from her today, and she's going to give us a psychiatric perspective on how to deal with menopause and how it should be looked upon as. And last panelist, last but not the least, I think she's one of the youngest of the lot, and she's the youngest and most enthusiast of the lot. And she's one of our mentors, teachers. I know her as a passionate teacher in gynecology. And it's a pleasure, Madam, to have Dr. Durusha, Madam, here. She's an eminent senior obstetrician and gynecologist from Mumbai. She's been the past president of Indian Menopausal Society. She's the director of Gynec World, and she has special interest in reproductive endocrinology, and she has her own infertility center. She has a keen interest in hormonal health in women. She believes that preventive healthcare is very important, and if we utilize our knowledge for prevention, then that is the right justification for our profession. And as I said, that she has been an excellent teacher to her students, and not only her students, but even other fraternity. She's going to give us a social, cultural aspect and perspective to menopause, and also going to guide us on how HRT needs to be looked, hormonal therapy needs to be looked upon or be treated in with Indian menopausal women. So I welcome all the panelists on this forum. And I would request first Dr. Jyoti Unni to start her views and her opinions on what she feels on this whole menopausal issue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beena and Dr. Vaishali. and it's a pleasure to be here and talk to women at this very unique conference. Hello to all of you. And I would like to begin by saying that many of us believe that a family is only as healthy as the woman is. But still, women neglect their own physical, mental, and emotional health in an attempt to take good care of their families. All of us are rushing all the time to do whatever we can for our husbands, children, mothers in law, mothers. And in the process, we don't have time to eat properly. We're rushing off to work ourselves. And I think this is something that we need to really think about and make sure that we correct this. A woman, right from the beginning, is someone's daughter, someone else's sister, another person's wife, someone's mother. And when is she ever going to be herself and find time for that person? This is really the time to take a good hard look at ourselves and decide what we want to do for ourselves and our women patients. So it's really, really important that we look after our own holistic health as well as that of our women patients. As a gynecologist, I find that this neglect goes beyond the reproductive years into the menopausal years. So even after the children have grown up and gone away, we have finished with all our responsibilities, and we do have time to spend on ourselves. We have got so much into this practice of looking after other people that we don't spend time on ourselves. So after their pregnancies, women very rarely come to see the gynecologist. They feel that once they've had their children, that's it. Whereas if they come to us regularly for their annual medical checkups, we can look after their health, not only their reproductive health or their reproductive organs, but a gynecologist it is imperative that we also do a general medical examination when these women come. So what they do is that they do have issues. Some of them have problems with their periods. Either they are early or they are too heavy, but they just feel that this happens as they reach menopause, and so they don't actually seek advice. And occasionally those can be precancerous changes. So it's important that women actually have their regular checkups, and if they have any problem at all, they should seek help rather than talking to the woman next door or the neighbor who says that this happened to me also and it's okay, it's normal, now the periods will stop. Because towards the menopausal transition, usually periods become lighter and may become more far apart. But if they become heavier, or they come closer together, or they last for a longer duration, or if you spot or bleed in between, then that is a concern, and that may signify that there is some problem there, and it's best for a gynecologist to examine the woman. Besides which, if they have some concerns like about their urogenital concerns, like urinary problems, anything to do with their sexual health, they're embarrassed to talk about it. And that's why even if they do have those problems, women rarely come forward and talk about it. Urban Indian women, as far as I can see, do not seem to have as high a prevalence of vasomotor symptoms, that is hot flashes or night sweats, as their Western counterparts. Our women complain more of fatigue, insomnia, or difficulty in falling asleep, or not able to stay asleep, or have very interrupted sleep. They talk a lot about weight gain, backache, and other joint pains. Working women, particularly those women who are in high-profile jobs, they may report a loss of confidence in their abilities to look after their entire workforce, or nervousness before they have to give a speech, which they had never faced in the past. Rural women, on the other hand, or women from urban slums, mainly complain of backache and joint pains. They don't have the time to think about hot flushes and night sweats. And many of them also have prolapse of the uterus. This may be due to the practices of carrying heavy loads on their heads, such as firewood and water. Though they will not talk about it and one needs to ask pointed questions, quite a few women in this age group have frequency, urgency, and nocturia, which means they have to wake up very often, more than 2 or 3 times during the night to go and pass urine. So this is one of the reasons that they aren't able to sleep well. And in reverse, if they're not sleeping well, even though their bladders are not full, they feel the urge to go and pass urine. So by the time they get up, go pass urine and come back, whatever little sleep they had is also shot to pieces. Those who are even older, that is more than 15 or 20 years after the menopause, they even have incontinence. That means they leak urine. Either they have urgency, that means they feel they have to go immediately to the toilet, and before they can reach the toilet, they leak. Or they have stress urinary incontinence, which means when they cough or sneeze or laugh, they leak a little urine. And this, of course, is very embarrassing for them because they feel that, you know, they're always smelling of urine. And sometimes when this becomes too much, instead of seeking help, they isolate themselves and they just stay at home. They try not to meet people because they don't want this to become known. Similarly, if they don't want to go on holidays, or they don't want to go and spend a night in someone else's house in case they leak during the night and they soil the bedclothes. So these are things which we need to ask them about, because otherwise they don't talk about it. So we need to ask pointed questions about this. Older women also almost never tell us about their loss of libido or their dyspareunia or pain during intercourse. This happens due to estrogen deficiency, and it is important for us to talk to them about it so that they feel comfortable to discuss it. We are not to be judgmental about thinking that this woman is 70 years old or this couple is 75 years old and they won't be interested in sex now, or they don't need to be sexually active at this age. It is important that we are open-minded enough to talk about their concerns. And if they do have some problems with sexual dysfunction, and if we feel we are not capable of dealing with it, then we should refer them to a specialist who deals with these cases, rather than trying to brush it off by saying that it's not really required at your age. You've had a good sexual life for 20 years or 40 years, so why do you need it now? Now, basically, lifestyle changes are the key to good health in later years. And we have to make healthy choices about our diet and exercise. And it is important for us as health professionals to tell women that they need to inculcate these changes in their children, because particularly bone health is something which only comes during the first 30 years of your life. That's when you build your bones. So we must tell women that they have to particularly look after their girl child, because these children have to then grow up to become mothers. So during pregnancy, during breastfeeding, they lose a lot of milk, a lot of calcium. And so if their bones are strong and healthy before they are 30, before their childbearing starts, and they continue to use their calcium supplements and calcium in their diet through their lives, then they will be able to maintain their bone strength and thus their muscle strength into later years. So girl children, right from the beginning, in some households, where the milk is less, they will give it to the husband and the boys, but the girls will not get it. So they start off with this negative calcium balance. And then our young children nowadays are not going out to play. And because they're staying indoors, they don't develop as much of their bone and muscle strength, because they're not playing outdoor games, they're not out in the sunlight, and they're not doing any physical activity. So we have to make healthy choices, and weight management is an essential part of this strategy. The traditional Indian diet is really very nutritious, and we should revert to that. Eating whole grains or millets, fresh vegetables that are locally available, not trying to get fruit and vegetables which are from exotic countries. So by the time they reach us, all their nutrition is gone. So if we have something which is locally grown, then so much the better. Different dals, mixed dals, and a small quantity of nuts and a little bit of ghee every day gives us a good mix of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Milk and milk products will provide the calcium as well as some protein, and eggs are a good source of protein, as are fish and chicken for non-vegetarians. The white foods, that is sugar, maida, salt, and white rice, should be avoided or consumed in very small quantities. We should certainly restrict the tea and coffee that we drink, and also green tea. There's such a fad of drinking green tea, and green tea is a bladder irritant. So it can cause a lot of problems besides frequency. So, 2 cups of green tea a day is okay, but everything that is good has to be had in moderation. You cannot just drink 6 cups of green tea because green tea is supposed to be good for you. Cessation of smoking and alcohol are also important, and we need to talk to our women about this. And in our Indian women, it may not be smoking of cigarettes, but it may be chewing of tobacco, it may be pan masala, gutka. These are things that we need to talk to them about. Exercise, again, we need to incorporate into our daily routine. And diet and exercise is something which we probably need to write on our prescriptions, because otherwise patients don't take it seriously. Unfortunately, in our busy urban lives, we have become sedentary, and machines have replaced many jobs which used to be done manually. So whatever form of exercise you enjoy, please pursue that. Whether it's walking, swimming, dancing, climbing stairs, yoga, each person should think of something which they enjoy doing and practice that at least 5 days a week. Now, if we think of something as we have to do this for exercise sake, it may not happen. We keep trying to put it off. But if we do it because we love it, like for example, dancing, you don't need a partner to dance. There are lots of things available online. You can have Zumba, you can have Pilates. Once the lockdown ends, perhaps get together a little group of people, just go onto your terrace, play some music with your mobile phone and dance. Into your daily routine, you can climb steps instead of taking the lift. During COVID times is the best thing to do, because in the lift, you're in a closed environment with many people. So it's much better, even if you're wearing a mask, to use the stairs. You get in that exercise also. Besides that, if you can put in some amount of resistance training or weight training, that really helps to retain muscle strength as well as healthy bones as we grow older. So some women, besides the lifestyle changes, may need specific treatment for symptoms, and they should seek the advice of a menopause practitioner so that appropriate medication can be advised. Lots of safe and effective options are there, both hormonal and non-hormonal. So for women who are unable to take hormonal medication or have reservations about it, they don't want to take it, they have heard some side effects, they can talk these things through. And then non-hormonal options are there for everything that happens around menopause, whether it's irregular periods, whether it's hot flushes and night sweats, urinary problems, for all medication available. So prior to instituting treatment, it is important for us as clinicians to take a detailed history and a thorough examination to see what is the most disabling symptom so that we can address that first. Perhaps we'll need to do a few baseline investigations so that we also recognize other conditions like hypertension, diabetes, problems, dyslipidemias, and then we diagnose and treat all of them, including the woman's symptoms. I will leave you with the Indian Menopause Society slogan of ensuring that our women are fit at 40, strong at 60, and independent at 80. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. That was an excellent overview. I think you covered the differences between urban and rural so well, the Indian specific changes that menopausal women face. And I like your slogan, actually. That's a very motivating slogan for Indian women. I'm glad that you could say that on this forum. I'm sure a lot of women will be inspired by it. I had just two brief questions for you. That what do you feel about pelvic floor exercises? Like how important it is for a woman at menopause?
Pelvic floor exercises are really important, and again, they should preferably be started during childbearing years, during pregnancy, because the hormones of pregnancy make the pelvic floor very relaxed. And once women labor and have a delivery, then many of the nerve fibers, muscle fibers are torn. And if the woman continues to do pelvic floor exercises from that time, she can prevent pelvic organ prolapse. So it is important that she does them. I'll just quickly tell you one very simple exercise. What the woman needs to do is just breathe normally and breathe out as if, and think that she's passing urine. And then as she's passing urine, if she wants to control or hold the stream of urine, she has to pull all the muscles of the pelvic floor. That means the lower vaginal and pelvic muscles, just pull them in towards her. So tightening the area as if she wants to stop the stream of urine. And then count to 10. So she can count loudly in case she finds she's holding her breath, so that she doesn't hold the breath. Count to 10, release it slowly, and then tighten again and count to 10 again. So at least 3 or 4 times she should do this. And then she can also do squeeze and release rapidly, because there are fast twitch and slow twitch fibers. So if she does it slowly and quickly, she will exercise both types of fibers. The other thing is that this can be done anytime, sitting, standing, walking. So it is something which, whenever the woman remembers, she can do it. And if she does it twice or thrice during the day, it will really help. For women who already have developed some prolapse, this will not, take in the prolapse. It won't make it go away, but at least it will stop it from growing further faster. So it will delay the progress of the prolapse. And this will also help with urinary incontinence. So stress urinary incontinence, where she leaks when she coughs and laughs, if she does these exercises and tones those muscles, she will find that she's not leaking as much urine.
I think that's a very simple exercise to do and a very important tip that you have given. It's easy to be performed in any setting, and I think a major complication of stress incontinence is prevented by it. Madam, what is your view on cancer screening? Most of our menopausal women are scared about that now I'm going to be at risk of this pap smear is to be done and breast screening is to be done. So
Right.
What's your view on that?
No, definitely. For anything that screening is available, we should do it, because, it is, you can either, in the earlier days, we used to try to get the woman, make sure we diagnose her in early stages of the cancer. Now, in many cases, we are able to diagnose in precancerous stages. And then the treatment options are very easy and simple, so that this doesn't progress into cancer. As far as cervical cancer is concerned, screening should actually start 3 years after the woman has started having sexual intercourse. So depending on whether married or unmarried, 3 years after sexual activity begins, she should start. And the smears should be done once in 3 years, as long as they have been normal. They don't need to be done every year unless she has had an abnormal smear. There is also HPV testing, which is now available. And if we co-test, HPV testing should only be offered to women over 30. And if HPV test and a pap smear are both negative, then we can repeat the test only after 5 years. We don't need to do it after 3 years. And cervical cancer screening should go on till the age of 65. After 65, if she has had 3 negative smears in the past, we can stop screening, because if she has not developed a precancerous lesion till then, she's unlikely to develop it, or even if it develops, she's unlikely to progress into invasive cancer. Because after 65, it also becomes very difficult because of the vaginal atrophy for women to undergo the smear. So if she's had good smears up to then, you know, we can stop it. But if she's never had a smear and you see a woman for the first time at the age of 67, then you need to do at least one smear at that time. And in women who do not have access to regular smears, WHO recommends at least one smear at the age of about 35 or beyond. So that one pap smear at least is done. Breast screening, yes, in younger women, self-breast examination. In women over 40, then a mammography can be done and should be done actually annually. In Indian women particularly, the breast cancer comes earlier. So our women develop breast cancer between 40 and 50, unlike Western women who usually develop it after 50. So we should have, and if there is a strong family history, that means mother or sister has had breast cancer, then 10 years before that, the woman should start her screening for breast cancer by doing mammographies 10 years before. And in younger women below 40, the breasts are very dense. So you may not actually get a very good mammography picture, in which case an ultrasound may also be needed to screen. But self-breast examination, where the woman with the palm of her hand goes around the entire breast as well as under the armpit, is very important for women to do at least once a month. Though there are studies which say that self-breast examination and clinical breast examination do not actually pick up things, in our country where we don't have access to mammography so readily, it is important that our women do this. Once a year, get the doctor to check the breast, and every month after a period, if they're still menstruating, they check the breast, because just before a period, the breast does feel very lumpy. And the important thing is they should not try to hold the breast between the fingers and thumb like this, because it will feel lumpy. So they put all the fingers and the thumb together. They can start at the nipple and go round and round to cover the whole breast and then the axilla, or radially from the nipple outwards in all directions, but they shouldn't miss any part. Also, it's a good idea to look at the breast in the mirror so that they get familiar with what their breast looks like. So if the nipple gets puckered or anything, they can make out that this is something different and go and see a doctor. As far as cancer of the uterus or the ovary is concerned, there's really no screening method. For uterus, usually there is some abnormal bleeding. So any abnormality in the menstrual pattern, they should see a gynecologist. Ovary, only if they have family history, that the gynecologist will be able to tell them what is the best test to do.
Thank you, ma'am. That was an excellent perspective given from a gynecologist point of view. And I thank you and I request you to be there with us because we have a take home at the end. So if it is possible, please be there. And we move on to our next panelist, Dr. Sridevi. Madam, you are there on screen? They are there on the forum? Dr. Sridevi? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, so Dr. Sridevi is going to now give us an endocrinologist's view. Now, we heard an excellent gynec view, and Dr. Sridevi will tell us her view on the endocrinologic aspects of menopause. Please go ahead, Dr. Sridevi.
Yeah. So, menopause is that phase of life in a woman's life where the woman spends almost 1/3 of her life post-menopause. So clinically, we say menopause when the patient has not had any menses for about a year. And most of the changes of menopause start about 3 to 4 years before menopause, where slowly the follicular release starts decreasing, and there is a decrease in the estrogen production and an increase in the FSH production. We know that the follicular count is indirectly related to the FSH levels. So even before hitting menopause, about 3 to 4 years before menopause itself, the FSH levels start raising. Then perimenopausally, women have a lot of problems which have been highlighted again by Madam. She has covered the vasomotor symptoms, the urinary symptoms, and the mood disorders or mood-related symptoms. So when a patient with menopause walks into our clinic, our first questionnaire should include, apart from the symptoms of menopause, the various metabolic complications which can arise during menopause, which include an increase in the incidence of diabetes and thyroid disorders. Most of the hormonal changes during aging include pancreas related and thyroid related changes, wherein there is an increased incidence of impaired fasting glucose, impaired glucose tolerance, type 2 diabetes after 60 years of age. And almost 50% of these elderly individuals with diabetes are not diagnosed. So whenever we have a menopausal lady, it's our chance to test for all these various metabolic complications which can arise, which are diabetes, hypothyroidism, and dyslipidemia. It's important to look into her family history and assess the risk of cardiovascular diseases. As the estrogen levels reduce, there is an increase in the incidence of cardiovascular diseases and mortality. So menopause is that particular time where we can assess all these symptoms and investigate them accordingly and set in a preventive aspect to them, wherein we should emphasize on the physical activity. During menopause, there is a decrease in the muscle mass, there is a decrease in the growth hormone, decrease in the IGF-1, and there is an increase in the fat tissue, especially centripetal obesity, which puts them at increased risk not only of diabetes and cardiovascular health, but also it starts limiting their physical activity. So it enhances physical inactivity, which we have to set right by giving them lifestyle goals. Many times we see patients complaining to us that their diet is the same as before, but still they are increasing in weight. This is due to a reduction in the muscle and an increase in the fat tissue. So apart from the diabetes related problems in these women, there is an increased incidence of subclinical hypothyroidism also. Natural course of aging is that there is a reduction in T3 and TSH levels in elderly individuals, especially individuals more than 80 years. They do have a mild increase in TSH and a reduction in T3, and which is actually protective. There we need not replace any thyroxine for these patients. But in the 50 plus or 60 plus women, there might be an increased incidence of autoimmune thyroid disease also, which is age-related autoimmune diseases, and nothing related to aging, but related to increased incidence of autoimmunity. So these problems will have to be dealt with, wherein thyroxine supplementation may help, because subclinical hypothyroidism is associated with increase in the cholesterol levels, decrease in the cognition, and increased incidence of cardiovascular diseases related with the increase in the cholesterol. So thyroxine supplementation in this age group might help. Apart from the diabetes and the thyroid, the third important aspect which I would like to highlight is the bone mineral density screening, which we have to start in these postmenopausal women, and in those women who are found to have osteoporosis, institution of therapies like bisphosphonates, calcium, vitamin D, and depending on the level of bone mineral density, addition of PTH or addition of denosumab can be undertaken. Most of the times I feel that many of these women are never screened for these bone related disorders, and osteoporosis is a very undertreated, underdiagnosed condition in our country. And these women, whenever you see an elderly 70 or 75 plus year old lady who comes with vertebral fractures and deformities, one feels that more could have been done if a screening procedure was instituted early in her life. Apart from the bone mineral density and calcium and vitamin D supplementation in these people, as Madam has pointed out, weight-bearing exercises will also improve. Actually, one starts thinking what is the use of going to gym or doing any weight-related exercises in this elderly age group. But it is these people who require more amount of isometric training also, which may be started with smaller weights and then progressed on to heavier weights. Some amount of weight training should be instituted in the postmenopausal ladies. Then apart from that, regarding the vaginal dryness and dyspareunia, as Madam has mentioned, use of vaginal lubricants is the first line of therapy, where a simple KY gel can be used on a daily or an alternate day basis, which will reduce the symptoms of vaginal dryness in an elderly lady. Recently, I had a 70-year-old lady who was reluctantly mentioning about this vaginal dryness, and they do not have anybody to speak to. She actually has a son, I believe, a son and a daughter, and she doesn't have anybody to speak about that vaginal dryness. So adding a simple lubricant will help these women. And sometimes we may even consider giving them estrogen dependent creams for reducing the vaginal dryness and the urge incontinence symptoms. So apart from the vaginal symptoms, they do have an increased incidence of urge incontinence, stress incontinence, overactive bladder. In these situations, we may not be able to completely take care. Sometimes they might require a small surgical procedures, which gynecologists would be, or genitourinary surgeons or urologists would be better equipped to deal with. Then apart from that, the most dramatic side effect of menopause is the hot flushes. We see women in their early menopausal years coming and telling to us about the symptoms of hot flushes, which lead to disruption of their day-to-day lifestyle. And it bothers them a lot, and many a times it also leads to depression and mood related issues, the hot flushes. So initially, if there are no risk factors for giving an estrogen supplementation, one should think about supplementing with the estrogen patch or estrogen gel, which will relieve them of these vasomotor symptoms. And apart from that, we also have recently bazodoxepine and estrogen combination, which might come in, which is supposed to have all the beneficial effects of estrogen and does not have any of the side effects related to estrogen supplementation. Apart from the hormonal therapy, one can also think of adding SSRIs if the woman is having any other risk factors which puts her at an increased risk of developing, say, breast cancer or venous thromboembolism, wherein we cannot give a hormonal therapy. We could, to relieve her hot flushes symptom, give her SSRIs, which can relieve her of the symptoms. Most commonly used are escitalopram or venlafaxine. And then we also have addition of gabapentin, pregabalin, and tibolone, which can be used where we can't use any of these other medications like estrogen or SSRIs.
Madam, can I interrupt you with a question? I just wanted to know, you said about osteoporosis screening. Now, we know that BMD is not easily available in all cities. So what is your take on how you should be approaching to osteoporosis prevention at menopause, and how should you look upon in the second tier city or three tier city where BMD is not easily available?
Okay. Where BMD is not available, we have a FRAC score assessment, wherein we have a country specific score which is easily available on the net, which we can use to see if this particular patient is at an increased risk of fracture or not. Irrespective of the risk of fracture, we have to supplement each and every patient with calcium and vitamin D, and recommend a daily physical activity routine, which should include aerobic exercises and also weight bearing training. Apart from that, if there is an increased risk of fracture, say if the patient is already on steroids for some other condition like rheumatoid arthritis or bronchial asthma, we should proactively start them on bisphosphonates, and so that the glucocorticoid associated osteoporosis can be prevented. So FRAX is a simple tool which we can use anywhere, even in office setting, without a BMD requirement, which will simplify many of the treatment related decisions.
Yeah, I think here I would like to tell the audience that FRAX is easily available on the Google. So it is India specific tool. It's simple clinical parameters are included, and you just get a calculative figure. So if the risk is more than 20%, the risk of fracture is considered very high for any fracture site. If it is more than 3%, it is for hip fractures. So we know that hip fractures are very common in postmenopausal women. So I think this is a tool which even a layperson can use and identify their own fracture risk also. So thank you, madam. That was very good. And one more question I have for you is, you spoke about sarcopenic obesity that occurs at menopause and with aging. So what do you think prevents this sarcopenic obesity, and what are the strategies you recommend to menopausal women to prevent that?
First and foremost would be lifestyle measures, wherein they reduce the amount of carbohydrate and fat content in their diet, improve the amounts of vegetables and protein consciously, then limit their portions. Then after the dietary interventions, one could think of physical activity, which will improve the muscle mass and reduce the fat mass. There are also agents like DHEAS which one can use, but their use is not of proven benefit. We could think of using them in selected patients. Then adult growth hormone deficiency is something, if we can diagnose, we can treat it with the growth hormone replacement, which improves the muscle mass and reduces the fat content in elderly.
Yeah. So I think there are a lot of options which are opening up for treatment of frailty and for sarcopenic obesity. So thank you, madam, for that perspective. It was an excellent overview from the endocrinologist point of view. So now I request you to be there on the panel so that we can have a discussion at the end. And now we move on to Suparna Telang, madam, for a different view altogether, a psychologic view. And as I said in the beginning, she believes that mind is the menopause is more in the mind than in the body. So let us hear from her. You're muted, madam. Yeah. Okay.
I've unmuted myself.
Yes.
I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
unmuted myself. And hi, everybody. I think menopause is also a phase of transition, like a phase of transition that you had when you were growing up from your age of, say, adolescent to adulthood. The phase of transition here is not as a positive phase, but it goes towards a little negativity. When you are growing and going into an adulthood, you are very curious and you are very enthusiastic about reaching that phase for few reasons, that not only because you are going to be adult for whatever you want to do, so it's going to give you freedom in life. You can tell your parents, oh, I'm an adult now, so they can't stop you. There is always an desire to try out so many things in their life, and culturally, you are not allowed to do it. But exactly reverse happens when you are transiting into a menopausal phase. What has happened is, socially, culturally, for many, many years, as the lifespans were short and menopause was expected to be reached around 40 to 50, people, rather women, were believed that, okay, this is almost end of my functional life in every way. Now I'm going to lose out on many of my functional abilities. I'm going to get slower than what I am. Maybe my memory will get affected. Maybe I'll start developing wrinkles. I'll start having hair fall. Yes, all these things do happen. But along with that, their importance in the social status also gets affected. It was not only in the past, but even during the present era, where women are working even at 60, 65 very efficiently. This transition, when it came culturally or socially as 40 or menopause, means you're going to lose all this. It is there in their subconscious, fitted so firmly that today they have all the knowledge that they can prevent so many things from happening. They still are stressed about it. So this age is also called as age of transition, age of stress, extreme stress. As I have mentioned earlier, the stress is not only because of the hormonal changes. Yes, the hormonal changes do make a difference in moods, in mindsets, because after all, it all comes from the brain's limbic system, which is an area in the brain which deals with your memory, with your emotions, as well as your hormonal balancing. So everything is put together and everything affects each other. So those things are bound to come. But if you start looking for it, you find it. Maybe in a small quantity, somewhere here, there, and then you exaggerate it. I think some time ago, Dr. Shah said that when a lady surgeon throws an instrument, they say, oh, menopause. Not only in the operation theater. I must give you a live example of a lady who I saw in my clinic. This woman works at a very good position in an IT office. She is a team leader and she has 6 of them working with her in her team. One day, it so happened that 2 girls who are in her team, they are kind of very lazy workers. So maybe she pulled them up and they both had impression to be created against her or whatever it is, she told the other 3 guys in their group, 3 or 4 of them, oh, this woman now is getting senile. Was a word which hurt her very much. She's getting senile, menopause to hua hi hoga, pata nahi. If you one day late means how much it matters to her. She has nothing to do but do work, work, work. We have our lives. We need to go out, we need to party, and work remains. Yeah? Next day you do feel lazy completing the work. Was their explanation. But this word senile hit her so much that when she came to my office, she was crying away non-stop with only one question: is my memory getting diminished, or does menopause bring about memory deterioration? So there are so many things like this which they need to understand. It doesn't mean that you reach menopause, all your hormones are gone. No, they have to understand the progress of hormones also, what happens after menopause. Third incident, or a very good case I remember, is of another lady. She is about 50 plus, was a teacher in a school, now about to be retired. And she came and she said, Doc, I don't have any emotional problem or no anxiety, no depression, but I have a personal question. Her personal question was that she had a colleague, good friend. She could exchange all her thoughts and emotions and confine into him, and so did he do it to her. They spent good 8 to 10 hours in school with each other. So there was a better communication between them rather than she and her husband. And of late, she thought, true or false or just her own impression or her feeling, that her husband is little over involved in his work and not looking towards her, or not appreciating her, or doesn't care for her, was her feeling. And so she had sort of started going towards this gentleman much more. I just paused. I said, okay, so what? So you're good friends. She said, no, ma'am, how do I tell you? Maybe little more than good friends. And I don't know whether I'll be able to get out of it. I'm being very stressed. So this kind of incidences of extramarital flings are also common in this age group. They want to try out how attractive, appealing they are even at this age. May not mean that they do not care for their families. Not that it happens to many women, but this is also a possibility, and it is increasing in number nowadays with more and more freedom that the women get. Doesn't mean if a woman of menopausal age has a male friend or a colleague with whom she can exchange emotions or talk, or is good friend, should be an extramarital relationship. But that is what can happen during this. And it is not only about women, but it is the same about men. Third important thing is women start feeling the pressure of empty nest syndrome, is what we call. Children are grown up. They don't need their mother's support so much as they needed when they were young. So women have sacrificed everything for the sake of children. Their hobbies, their passions, everything was sacrificed. And now if children are on their own and they make their own decisions without consulting the mother feels hurt. The mother doesn't like it. As it is, her physical changes are bothering her. At the same time, her family also gets disturbed. Her feelings in the family that I am losing my importance. Nobody wants me now. because they don't need me now. And all those feelings also make her feel depressed. Another important aspect of this transition is, as such, young people are preferred, or they are given more importance in the society for many reasons. For many reasons. Maybe because they are alert, more alert. Maybe they are more tech savvy and they speak about technologies much more. So that is more impressive and they are liked by the social circles. When in social circle, if a woman has all of women of her age group, the discussion is generally about the physical aspects like, oh, I'm losing my hair. Do you think I'm showing few wrinkles on my face? That's what the other day somebody passed a comment. What cream should I use? Means by and large, we all tend to spend little extra time and money on looking after our skin, our looks, our styles. Maybe we never thought of it so much as women start paying more attention to. So that is to maintain their own impression, their own lifestyles, their own social status. Third important thing is the relationship between husband and wife. We have been talking about drying of vagina, etc. But here, the changes of menopause, the hormonal changes of menopause, perhaps cumulatively with the social, as I began with it, that socio-culturally the thought that now my desire is going to be reduced. I don't think I'll be getting the same desire for intimacy as much as I got it earlier. Will I be able to satisfy my husband? So with these thoughts also, many women refer from getting intimate with their husbands. A couple about 60 plus, not more than that, came, and the gentleman had to say that, see, my wife now, since she has been diagnosed as a diabetic, she's lost total interest in sex. Does diabetes make it happen? The diabetologist says that no, it doesn't. So he referred us to you. When I questioned her, she said, no, but my friends told me that when you have a diabetes, you should not be getting intimate with your husband. You will transmit it to him also. That was a shocking thing that I've ever heard anybody saying it. And so during this age, or maybe any age of development, when you give more importance to what your friends or colleagues or social circle discusses about your menopause or about any of your personal or private life, please do not listen to that. Go back to your gynecologist, talk to her, your family doctor, talk to him or her, whatever it is, and get your physical queries completed. So it is also an age of aggression. Maybe all these things like changing looks or social status, or maybe the hormonal changes, the sweats, the hot flushes, whether they come, they don't come, but you expect and you invite also sometimes the depression, irritability. Emptiness also produces a lot of irritability. So all these things also give an increment in your aggressive behavior. A woman who was very quiet has now become very aggressive. She immediately gives an answer. The family says she never answered, but now suddenly she's become a tigress. So these things have also happened during menopause. And sometimes it's just the reverse. Some people, some women may not become tigresses, but they may sit and cry and cry and cry. That they are neglected, they are not important in the family or in the society. Very funny incidents. A lady came back and said, you know, till now in every marriage, they used to ask me, what am I wearing? All my cousins were very keen in finding out what am I wearing. And this time when I went with my new saris, nobody even noticed it. They were all interested in asking my daughter-in-law, where did she buy that shalwar kurta from? So, you know, here the feeling of neglect also comes. So they become very depressed. So taking care of all these things in very short, you have to positively plan for your menopause, your life after menopause or perimenopausally. Pursue your hobbies, your interests, whatever you have. And if you did not have any, your family was your hobby, your whole life was your family. Now think what you want to do after that. Exercise, exercise, exercise. We all have stressed the importance of exercise. And one more thing, along with keeping a physical fitness, exercise is also important for the mental health. How does it give it? Because when you exercise, endorphins are generated in your body, which are called as happy hormones. So that elevates your mood also. Third thing, spend more time with your partner. He also needs it and you also need it. Plan things just for two of you. If you don't have a partner, doesn't matter. You have your close friends, circles, 1, 2, or be sure enough that you can travel alone or do things all by yourself. Now here, urban and rural differences also matter. These all things what I said can be true for urban women, but they are much more true and practically implemented by elders in the rural area. Rural women, they may not have understood what are the changes physical, like technicalities of changes, but they are prepared. They are mentally, emotionally much better prepared to face the menopause than urban women. Perhaps because their social status is accepted and they're not threatened by the importance in the society as much as urban women feel threatened. Plus, they know that once this has happened, I have to divert my interest into helping other women. So they find some or the other way to help other women in their household work or teaching younger daughter-in-laws or daughters to grow up, learn something, maybe cooking, maybe tailoring, maybe singing, maybe puja, maybe anything. But they love to train or teach those girls and they accept that this is the age that is going to give them the seniority and what are going to be the roles of their seniority. And that is the reason you will find much less depression, anxiety, aggression in rural women who face these menopausal changes. They also have the same physical changes coming up, but socially, culturally, they are much better prepared for it as against the urban women who are not prepared for it. And I think that's what, if somebody remembers, it should be fine.
Thank you, madam. Was a vast spectrum of psychological, you can say, I would not say diseases, but the psychological changes that occur in this transition. And I'm so glad that you spoke about them and we have a lot of audience to benefit out of it. So I'm sure they're going to take home a lot of messages from all our eminent panelists today. So I think we have the time for Dr. Durusha now. And I request, madam, that you give your perspective on how one should be dealing with menopause and how it is different in the Indian context.
I think menopause is such an old word and today considered like almost like a bad word. But I think menopause is very much appreciated by the women who are living in villages, who are working hard in the fields, and who have to go to work irrespective of whether they are bleeding heavily or whether they are having any other issues. And so when they go out into the, when they have a menstrual problem, instead of really addressing the medical problem they have a hysterectomy done. And their uterus is removed and they're very, very happy about the whole situation because now no periods, no nonsense. But at the same time, there have been instances where we've all heard that when young girls have their periods or when women have their periods, they are asked to stay out of the house. They are, sort of treated as untouchables, and they are handled very difficult. Handling them is very difficult. Though I agree that these women are actually getting rest during their menstrual periods, and they are not allowed to do any work in the house, which I think is their moment of rest. But when women become menopausal and they stop getting their periods, there are two classes of women we see. One are the women who are actually coming to us, who are the more privileged class, who come to the private physicians. And the other are the underprivileged, socioeconomically unprivileged, who live in probably in villages or in urban slums. There is a different attitude or a different approach to menopause by both these groups of women. Say, for example, and it has been described very well over here with all our speakers, where the underprivileged sector feels very happy that they've reached menopause. They are not bleeding. They don't have to think about pain. They don't have to think about any heavy periods. And also, they feel that they are able to have a better status in their family, especially as women grow older and they've reached by the age of 50, I think in the rural areas, they've had grandchildren and they've had children and grandchildren, and they they have a status in the family where everything is asked of them. What should we do, mom? How do we go ahead? Etc. etc. Whilst if you compare the whole situation to the urban woman, as Dr. Suparna very well explained, that the urban woman feels neglected, she has sexual problems, she has emotional problems, etc. etc. So in short, we are dealing with two groups of women who have got different issues, and therefore we need to handle them differently. We have the ones who are underprivileged, who have no idea about what menopause entails. They don't have any idea about their symptoms. They don't have any idea about, what happens after menopause and what are the comorbidities they can get. Whilst the ones who are privileged, they are well educated, they are more aware of issues, they watch, various programs, they are quite updated with the knowledge, and I'm sure they've got immense amount of knowledge today with everyone talking about the symptoms, the signs, how you handle it, etc., etc. So I think, where it comes to India, we are like a crucible of mixed population, and therefore our handling of women has to be totally different. Say, for example, if I have a woman in the villages, and if I have to offer her hormone therapy for her problems, I will never offer that just like that, because we know when we give hormone therapy, we have to have the woman under medical supervision. We cannot just give her the therapy and say, okay, now you take it, and then, you just keep taking it and go back for your checkup. Because as we have found that women don't really want to go for a checkup. They go only when they have a problem. There's no concept of preventive health care. And therefore the fear is that if they keep taking the hormone therapy, they may have some adverse symptoms and adverse conditions. Whilst on the other hand, we have the women who come who are more aware about menopause and all the issues. When they come to our offices and we put them on hormone therapy, the career women, I find, this is my personal impression, the career women are the ones who adopted the fastest. They are the ones who want it because they feel that, suddenly their life has become totally different. They've lost confidence. Like there have been some women who have told me, I find it difficult even to cross the road. There was a lady designer who says, I can't design any longer. I can't even cut the shirt which I want to create. So in short, they are the ones who are wanting hormone therapy, and once they get started on it, they're so happy with it that they don't want to stop it. So we had a lady who actually had developed breast cancer, and she wanted to continue the hormone therapy, and we said, no, you can't continue. Of course, she was being monitored with the hormone therapy while she was on therapy. And she was one of those unfortunate ones who probably had a possibility of breast cancer within her, and after about 7-8 years she did develop breast cancer. But the thing is that she was refusing to switch off. She was refusing to switch it off, and therefore culturally, if we talk about Indian women, it's very difficult to put them all in one group. We have separate groups. We have the educated women who are more aware. We have the uneducated who are less aware. We have the more privileged ones who have got everything around them. So they have the maximum amount of morbidity because they are the ones who are sitting around, have everything available to them. They have remotes which they use. They are not working physically at home. They are the ones maximum who have arthritis. They have obesity and all the complications which follow that. There have been studies done where they have compared women of different age groups, and they find that these morbidities are highest in women who are more privileged because they don't really physically, do anything themselves. Of course, they may do some amount of exercise if they are tuned to doing it. But honestly, I personally feel that there are not many, women who are not career women, the women who are, homemakers, who as they grow older, they tend to not exercise, they tend to take it easy, they have enough staff at home, and therefore their morbidity is much higher. They have more of arthritis and they have more of obesity. Whilst if you see the women in the underprivileged sector, they are working hard, they are lifting weights, they are carrying things. So they have a whole lot of exercise, their bones may be stronger, I don't know. Because at the same time, they have many more children, they breastfeed for a longer time, they don't take calcium during their pregnancies. So we have a mix of women. But if you are coming to menopause itself, as culturally, I think our women are very happy when they reach menopause. They look at it positively. They say, thank God it's over. Whilst if you see the Western women, they are not happy because they feel they are not going to be as physically attractive to their husbands as they were before. And I see the difference in women because we do have quite a few women in Bombay who belong to consulates and a lot of foreigners. And I see the difference in their physical, looks. They're so well toned. They're so well, you can't believe it that they have had 3 children, especially Israeli women. They have quite a few children. But after they have delivered, I mean, they're back to absolutely normal. You'll never know that they've had 3 or 4 children. Whilst Indian women, I find they tend to neglect themselves after they've had their children. They get more flabby, they don't exercise, and especially vegetarians who don't have enough protein in their diet, they are more flabby. So in short, there's a huge cultural difference. We look at it positively in India, whilst if you look at it, the Western population is very upset when they reach menopause. Yes, sexuality matters to them a lot, and therefore a lot of women in the Western world do take hormone therapy. Whilst in the Indian scenario, I think many women do get when you educate them, talk to them about the benefits of taking hormone therapy, they are pretty happy to take it because they get convinced once you've talked to them and things like that. But once they go home, then it's a different story because then they will consult probably their neighbors, maybe the bhajiwala also, or maybe the shopkeeper. Should I take hormone therapy? They'll talk to anybody. And then they'll talk to their friends. Don't take it, you'll get cancer. I mean, that's all they hear. So they won't take the hormone therapy. They'll take it for a month or 2 to make you feel happy probably. But then they'll come and they will stop it. So in short, they do not take any hormone therapy. And very few women, I find a very small percentage take it. And they are usually the career women, as I know, because they are the ones, I think, who realize the importance of taking it. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you one very funny incident. I was talking to a couple wherein the husband and wife were both with me, and I was talking about all the benefits of hormone therapy to the lady. The husband was so convinced. He says, doctor, can I also take this hormone therapy? So you get my point, that it's I think hormone therapy is one of the is like a boon to women at the menopausal age. It can take care of a lot of their symptoms, and it can prevent morbidities if taken properly and under medical supervision. So of course, there's no question that lifestyle exercises and lifestyle changes have to be made. There's no question about it. That goes without saying. That has to be done. The exercises have to be done. You have to eat healthy. You have to prevent obesity, etc., etc. But the thing is that if a woman is on hormone therapy, I've realized that they feel much better. Because it's like a deficiency of a hormone in your body which was always there, and that deficiency is being supplemented by taking the hormone from outside, which will help you to get on with life and get on with the same confidence. And studies have shown that women who are on hormone therapy do much better as compared to women without hormone therapy in most of the aspects, except there are one or two areas where, yes, if it's taken for more than a certain number of years, say about more than 7 years, then the chances of breast cancer may slightly increase. But on the other hand, fracture rates decrease, colon cancer reduces, the mentally and physically women do much better. So there have been pretty large number of studies done on this. And in short, it has been shown that if a woman starts a hormone therapy by the age of menopause and takes it for a period of 10 years, she has more benefits versus risk. So if a woman starts it at 50 and takes it till 60, she has more benefits to herself and her health as compared to risk. But if she takes it after 60 till the age of 70, there is no difference in the benefits she may have. Neither will the risk increase. But after the age of 70, the risk will definitely increase. And therefore, as soon as women have taken it up to the age of 60, we start weaning them off it and try and get them off the therapy. Now, unfortunately, not many people keep themselves updated with the subject. There is so much of negative media attention to hormone therapy that any hormone a woman takes is considered as bad. So whether she takes oral contraceptives, whether she takes hormone therapy, everything is a big no. As soon as you start talking, you'll tell a patient would you like to take oral contraceptives? She'll say no. If you ask her, would you like to take hormone therapy? She'll say no. It's only because the word hormone comes into the picture, I think it's just got a bad connotation. So in short, I think if hormone therapy is taken under medical supervision with a right evaluation every year, it's just once a year evaluation, and given it to the right person, the right content or the right combination given to a patient with the right history. So you have to go into a good background check on the woman, see what disorders she already has, see what is her family history, see whether there is any negative thing for which she should not be on it. Of course, for any drug, we all need to do that as doctors. We need to make sure whether we give it to it's not the drug which is bad, it's given to the wrong person. And that is what you have to decide, whom to give it to, whom not to give it to, supervise that woman and take care of it. So in short, what I feel is that there is a lot available for menopausal women. And there's a lot, as earlier doctor has already mentioned, about all the therapies which we can give. But menopause has to be looked at positively. Yes, we know everyone feels, oh, menopause, I'm going to put on weight. Now, science has shown us that you don't really put on weight. There's just redistribution of fat. You may put on a kilo or two, but your fat starts coming around your waist. And that is why you tend to you think you put on weight. So it's important, and women use that as an excuse sometimes of putting on weight. They put on weight, they say, oh, I've reached menopause, what can I do? I put on weight. So it's unfortunate that menopause is being used as an excuse for not doing things, for all the problems which happen to you. And I think we have to look at it positively, and we have to look at it that it's a phase of life which we all go through, and we need to manage ourselves well. Lifestyle, of course, starts right from childhood and continues until we reach our graves. And we need to doing it, because we know that in India today, our population of older generation is almost 20% of the entire population. In the year 2050, we'll have millions of people or millions of women who will be post-menopausal. And now, of course, the average age of the life expectancy has increased. And in India, it is about 67 years is a life expectancy. There are more widows than widowers. There are more women left as widows as compared to men without wives. And therefore, because women outlive men, it's like a feminism after aging, where women are living longer as compared to men. But at the same time, those women who are not self-sufficient, who have been dependent on their husbands and now dependent on their sons, dependent on their daughter-in-law, and are not able to take care of themselves. And therefore, of course, depression comes in, all the psychological issues come in, stress comes in, there's no financial security. I've seen parents or women or widows who are shuffled from one family to the other. She may have 3 sons. Each son says, oh, why should I look after her? Or the daughter-in-law may say, I don't know who. But she goes every 3 months, she goes to a different son's house to live with her bag and baggage. It's unfortunate, but this is the problem in India. It has nothing to do with menopause. It has everything to do with aging. But since we are discussing menopause and aging sort of starts at the same time. Like if we compare women at 50 reaching menopause, aging also starts probably at that age. And as you go older, it gets worse. But women, what I want to bring out here is women who reach premature menopause. There are women who reach premature. 1 out of every 100 women reaches premature menopause. That is, she reaches menopause before the age of 40. And it has been shown that those women who reach premature menopause will have the same problems which a menopausal woman will have, but that many years earlier. So if she's 30 by the time she reaches menopause, because of whatever reasons, she is going to get all the changes which occur in a menopausal woman, which is because of lack of estrogen, that she has all these changes, will happen to her at that age. And then at that time, if it happens to her, you can imagine her sexual life, her fertility, all the issues coming. So in short, of course, everything can be managed, but we need to treat those women for sure. Hormone therapy has to be offered to a woman with premature menopause, at least till the average age of menopause. So this is the message which must go out, because hormone therapy it's a guideline by the International Menopause Society and the Indian Menopause Society that premature menopause has to be treated with hormones, of course, under medical supervision, so that she does not age faster, so that she enjoys her life the way every other woman is, and she must be taken care of. So I think I would like to end on that note that we have talked a lot about menopause, but I wanted to bring in this particular incident of premature menopause, which we are seeing now more often because women are smoking, women are undergoing, children are undergoing cancer therapy. There is a lot of childhood cancer which is coming up. Women are, I think smoking is a bad effect on ovaries, and therefore they do tend to reach menopause earlier. It's a well-known fact. Even they have problems getting pregnant faster. So they have a poor ovarian reserve, they lose eggs from their ovaries, and that toxicity which they get from the cigarette is really bad. So I think the message is going out: preventive healthcare, avoid smoking, avoid obesity, get yourself into a very healthy lifestyle which will help you for your future. Exercise regularly, and of course, if you reach, God forbid, premature menopause, just get yourself treated by the right doctor and get the right treatment for yourself. Everything can be corrected. There's nothing we, as today, cannot do. There are some things, of course, which are beyond the doctor's control. As of today, of course, the future looks very, very bright, and I'm sure there'll be much more we can do for them. So thank you very much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk.
Thank you, madam. I think you highlighted the cultural differences so well, and the importance of HRT, especially in premature menopause setting. I think that's a big take home today, that all the premature menopause needs to be actually offered, not denied, the HRT. That is very important. I have just a small question for you, that if you are offering HRT to a normal menopausal woman, what is the type of HRT that is offered? What is the dosing? What is the preparation? Is it a topical? Is it a oral? What is the preference? And is there some difference in the modality of the administration which determines the risk in future?
Yeah.
What is your take on that?
See, there are so many hormone therapies available. The reason is because women have got different histories. Like, say, for example, if a woman has got a strong family history of cancer, right? If there is a mother has breast cancer, her aunt has, her sister has, etc., etc., you would be a little reluctant to start her on hormone therapy because you would feel that probably she also may be at risk of developing breast cancer. So in such women, you would want to be sure whether they are genetically also affected, because genetically, if a woman is, see, we know that cancer is not caused because of hormones. It is a cancer which is you genetically have, or which is due to environmental issues. But basically, it's the hormone which makes the cancer grow faster, especially if the tumor is estrogen sensitive. So in such women, probably you would hesitate to give hormone therapy. You would want to evaluate her and see what is her risk, and you would counsel her. But suppose I have a woman who's a regular woman who's got no other complications, and she's got severe hot flushes. You know, she can't sleep at night because she gets up with sweat all over her. And she's, you know, there was one woman who says, Doc, I clean myself with a towel and I have to wring the towel, the entire towel, because I sweat so much. I mean, why do you want her to suffer? So in such women, if you recognize that she's got estrogen deficiency, which is causing her problem, you're going to help her by giving her that estrogen supplement from outside. It's something like somebody has, a little bit of thyroxine, which is less, we give it from outside. Anything which is not present in the body or it's insufficient, you're going to help her. So you would do that, of course, when you give it to the patient, you've made sure that medically there is no contraindication. Contraindication because some women do have, suppose she's giving me a history of deep vein thrombosis in the past. I would be very worried about giving a hormone therapy because estrogen may make it worse. So in short, things like, any cancer in the past, any deep vein thrombosis in the past, if she's got severe migraine, I would want to make sure whether this migraine is associated with hormones. Like say if she gets premenstrual migraine, which goes away after the period goes, then it's possible that she's going to get worse with the hormones. So in short, we have to try and determine what will help her. So if it is basically symptoms which you're trying to correct and helping her, then you would give her, a short hormone therapy for some time, maybe a year, 2 years, and then gradually wean it off. But if she has say a person has got osteoporosis already, or she's got osteopenia, not osteoporosis, but osteopenia, wherein her bones are fragile. She's had a history of a fracture before, and she's got a family history of osteoporosis. As a preventive measure, hormone therapy can be given as a therapy to prevent osteoporosis. So it's not, right. It definitely helps. There's evidence to show that estrogen works very well on the bone. So in short, we have to decide whom to give it to, so what we are giving it for, and then the therapy is decided based on whether she takes it orally or whether she takes it transdermally as a patch, or whether she uses a gel, or whether she uses it in different forms, because every woman cannot tolerate the same form. So that is the thing. And the second thing is if she's got a uterus within her or a uterus not there. If a uterus is out, then we don't need to add progesterone to a hormone therapy. But if she's got her uterus in, then we have to give her progesterone with the estrogen so that she does not develop endometrial cancer or uterine cancer. So the kind of therapy will depend on, and the dose will depend on how old she is. I mean, what are her symptoms? Say if she's a premature menopause, I would sometimes even increase the dose than what I would give to a menopausal woman. Because what we give to a menopausal woman is the physiological dose what a woman would require at that age. But in a premenopausal woman, I mean premature menopause woman, she's younger, her needs are higher. So probably you may give her a little higher dose. So it all depends on individual therapy. It's not like a mass therapy, you give the same thing to everybody. You have
I
to
think
individuate.
I should thank all the panelists. Actually, they've done an excellent job of, and all these topics were very different and very well put forth. I would just request all the panelists to give one-liner take-home message before we end our session, because I think we've had
Yeah, on beyond
overboard the time. Yeah, but I think it was worth the discussion. So I
Yeah.
am sure that it will benefit our audience definitely. Yeah. So beginning with Dr. Jyoti ma'am.
Yeah, I would just say that please look after your own health. Uh, if you have problems, go at that time. But if you don't have problems, at least have one annual medical checkup so that you remain healthy for as long as possible.
Keep going.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Sridevi, madam.
I would suggest to every woman that she welcomes menopause in the same way that she would welcome any other phase in her life, like a child or marriage or any such thing. So welcome it with open arms and take good care of yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. Suparna, ma'am. You're muted. You're muted.
I suggest to everybody, not just a woman, a menopausal woman, that they should have one psychiatrist as a very good friend. In
So you are our friend from today, madam.
as
You were always there.
well as don't think that if you are going to a shrink means you have some mental problem. No, they're good friends, good advisors, and they can make your life really happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am. Durusha, madam, your last
Yeah.
take, and we end at that note. Yeah.
So I would advise every woman that she must develop some hobby for herself besides taking care of her family and whatever she is doing, so that when the time comes when husband is very busy with his career, children don't need her, she does not go into the state of depression or doesn't have that emptiness syndrome. She gets involved in her own hobby, whatever she has taken up, whatever she enjoys gardening, she plays tennis, whatever. I think that hobby a woman must develop right from her younger days and pursue it and nurture that hobby, so that that becomes her life when she's finding herself, sort of at a loose end, and she's not used to having a profession or a career. This is the time she'll need it most. So I think the message I want to send out to every woman is pick up something what you enjoy doing and give it time. Don't say, oh, I'm going to give all my time to my child, I'm giving my child to my home, my time to my home, my husband. No, agreed, I'm not saying you neglect them, but keep that 1 or 2 hours to yourself to develop your hobbies. That's important.
Perfect, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for giving us time, valuable time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.